All right. Thank you, Mignon. The next application before this committee is from the state of New Hampshire, applying to hold a pre-window state-run primary. At this time, I'd like to welcome Chair Ray Buckley and the New Hampshire delegation to begin their presentation.
It is election day in New Hampshire.
They vote for sport here in New Hampshire.
It all comes down to this. Voters here in New Hampshire already heading to the polls. State officials are predicting a record.
They expect a record turnout.
A record for the most votes ever cast.
This has been one of the best turnouts I've seen. We've been out straight since this morning.
People have been coming in here all day. They've been lined up since 5 a.m. this morning.
Anyone who thinks democracy is a spectator sport clearly hasn't met a New Hampshire voter. Other states have media markets. In New Hampshire, we have living rooms, diners, town halls. Presidential hopefuls know, come ready to listen, come ready to be tested. And for those up to the task, New Hampshire has always kept one promise. Here, every candidate gets a fair shot. Money can't buy you victory. Only shoe leather can do that. And when the votes are counted, they are counted that night. Quickly, completely, accurately, every time. If you can survive the gauntlet, you will come out a stronger candidate, and for the lucky few, a stronger president. Underdogs, outsiders, trailblazers, changemakers.
Yes, we can.
All of them tested here. All of them better for it. The presidential nominating process didn't always belong to the people. New Hampshire changed that. And a primary that belongs to the people has never mattered more. We are a small state, a purple state, a state where a candidate can't run an ad and call it a conversation, can't win without sitting across from the people they hope to lead. That's not tradition, that's accountability. So give us the New Hampshire treatment. Ask us the hard questions, put us through the ringer. We look forward to earning your vote.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As a committee, we have, over the past few months, been reimagining how our nominating process best reflects the values and needs of our party going forward. Fairness, efficiency, and rigor. New Hampshire fits squarely in those pillars and meets the criteria needed in our presidential nominating process. Regarding fairness, the New Hampshire Democratic Party truly does what it can to expand access to the ballot. In our state, civic engagement is not episodic, it's ingrained in our culture. We show up for town meetings, we elect a 424-member volunteer legislature, and most importantly, we vote. When it comes to efficiency, New Hampshire is a small state where anyone can compete. Candidates can campaign in rural, urban, and suburban areas all in the same day, and that's exactly what New Hampshire voters expect them to do. I know Senator Hassan will touch on this more. In New Hampshire, we run a calm, clean, and reliable election process where the results are known in a timely manner the night of the primary, no matter how close. In 2020, the presidential primary was decided by 3,900 votes, and the Associated Press was able to call the election in just 3 hours and 42 minutes. And when it comes to rigorousness, New Hampshire is a deeply purple state and serves as a critical testing ground for whether candidates can attract independent voters, an issue that we all know is incredibly pressing for the Democratic Party, particularly in this cycle. Independents make up a plurality of New Hampshire voters. New Hampshire is a rare state where winning the primary itself requires building a coalition beyond our base. And that's exactly the skill our nominee will need to win in November. In New Hampshire, candidates must develop unique organizing tactics that meet voters where they are and to develop strategies and messaging to connect with our diverse communities. In a 10-year span, our racial and ethnically diverse populations have increased by 74%, including a 62% increase in Latinos and a 52% increase in African American residents. Those numbers are only going to increase in the coming years as more than 20% of Granite Staters under the age of 18 come from diverse communities. Raw diversity numbers don't tell you whether a candidate has actually heard from those communities or just targeted ads at them. In New Hampshire, voters demand to be heard face-to-face, and candidates have no choice but to listen. Candidates will witness firsthand the well-oiled efforts of working people organizing for their rights. Currently, 10.6% of the state's workers are represented by unions, while 9.3% of the state's population currently belongs to a union, which reflects the union membership rates of the country as a whole. But numbers alone can't capture what it actually takes to win in New Hampshire. A candidate must earn votes in communities that look, work, and think very differently from one another. In our larger cities like Manchester and Nashua, you find the largest proportion of diverse resident populations. Along our southern border and the seacoast, you find suburban voters who mirror the voters in the very areas that decided the 2020 general election for Joe Biden. In the North Country, you will find rural voters who, like in other parts of the country, have felt left out of the Democratic Party, especially after factory jobs disappeared over the past 50 years. These areas give candidates a chance to develop strategies to bring communities like these across the country back into the Democratic fold. New Hampshire's role has always been about battle-testing candidates through tough, face-to-face conversations that no ad buy can replicate. And we are ready to continue doing that in 2028, in close coordination with our fellow early states. Those conversations don't just test candidates, they sharpen them, forcing real-time adjustments to message and strategy that no focus group can achieve. The Granite State is ready to put candidates to the test and help send the strongest nominee possible into the fight in 2028. And we ask for your vote to put New Hampshire first. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend, our great Senator, Maggie Hassan.
Well, thank you, Joanne, and good morning. It is a real privilege to be here with all of you. I'm here because as we look to 2028, we need a primary process where every candidate has a fair shot and a tested nominee who has proven that they can win independent voters. With those criteria at the forefront, New Hampshire is the best state to hold the first in the nation primary. There's no primary as accessible as New Hampshire's. In the Granite State, campaigns are won through conversations with voters, in town halls, on street corners, and even in people's living rooms. Winning candidates don't need high name ID. They don't need large war chests to fund ads in multiple media markets, nor do they need to charter a private jet. In New Hampshire, a candidate can start their day talking to rural voters in the mountains, have lunch in our largest city, and then stop by a union hall near the seacoast before sunset. That's why our state was proving ground for underdogs and outsider candidates like Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, or John McCain in his Straight Talk Express. If we're truly interested in reducing the power of money in politics, then we should pick a state that has a history of rewarding big ideas over big ad buys. And at a time when we have a president who acts as though he is above the people, it's all the more important that our nominee be chosen through a process that requires candidates to answer directly to we the people, real people, including people who disagree with them. Furthermore, New Hampshire runs elections well. Even close contests like the ones in 2008 and 2020 had their results announced that primary night. The gauntlet of the New Hampshire primary has also helped strengthen future nominees. Granite Staters, with a volunteer citizen legislature of 424, prize civic engagement. In 2024, we had the highest turnout of any primary and had among the top 5 highest turnouts in the general election. Granite Staters also do their homework. They come prepared to ask candidates tough questions. Some candidates fall short under the pressure, but the ones who can pass this test end up being stronger candidates and better presidents. As President Kennedy said while campaigning in Nashua, our, quote, primary contests not only educate the public, they educate the candidate as well, close quote. And the New Hampshire primary provides candidates an education like no other. Some have raised concerns about New Hampshire's racial and ethnic composition, and I take those concerns seriously. I'll note that New Hampshire is not the state that it was a generation ago. Over the past 15 years, the percentage of Granite Staters of color has more than doubled. That trend is set to continue and accelerate. More than half the students in our 2 largest cities, Nashua and Manchester, are students of color. Immigrant groups, including Latino, Vietnamese, Indonesian, and Haitian Americans, have become indispensable parts of New Hampshire culture and communities. New Hampshire has also shown repeatedly that it is ready to make history. Our state was the first to send an all-female congressional delegation to Washington alongside a female governor. Senator Shaheen and I were the first 2 women ever elected, both governor and senator from the same state. And this year, New Hampshire has the chance to be the first state to elect an openly gay man to the United States Senate. No single state checks every box of the criteria, rigor, efficiency, or fairness on its own. But our nominating process was never meant to rest on one state alone. It works because the early states together reflect the breadth of our party and our country. I ask that New Hampshire be evaluated on the full range of criteria that matter. Those criteria should include consideration of the strengths that other early states have that will enrich the process as a whole. When considered in that broader context, New Hampshire's case is particularly compelling. The essential question that I believe should guide your decision about the order of presidential primaries is this: what order and grouping of early primaries gives our party the best chance to select the best Democrat to win the general election and serve as a strong president? Other states with other strengths representing other regions of the country should, of course, host early primaries as well. But the state that starts the process, where candidates are first tested and are given a chance to rise to the top, should be a state where any candidate, no matter how unknown, no matter their campaign budget, can run and win. That's why it matters that New Hampshire isn't just one of a few early states, but why it needs to go first. The first state should be the one with the lowest barrier of entry, where any candidate with a good message can afford the price of admission. On this point, New Hampshire stands alone. I also think that New Hampshire is the right state for the challenges of our moment. We're in an age where a candidate's authenticity is more important than ever. And New Hampshire's focus on retail campaigning is the perfect way to test a candidate's authenticity. When candidates are face-to-face with voters, when they're talking at the VFW or in a snowbank outside a Union Hall, voters can always spot a phony or someone who's just not comfortable in their own skin. And for the candidates who pass the authenticity test, we know that these real conversations with voters on the trail, when filmed on someone's phone, can become the viral moments on social media that define a candidate and a campaign. If we want our nominee to be authentic and relatable, then they should compete in a primary where they actually have to talk and listen to real people. Finally, New Hampshire's status as a purple state will help our nominee be prepared to win in November. In recent statewide New Hampshire elections, Republicans and Democrats have both won in landslides on the same ballot, and independents are a critical block in our primary. If New Hampshire goes first, our nominee will be better prepared to win swing voters in November because they will already have had to earn their votes in the primary. We are in a perilous time for our country, so it truly matters that we get this right. The stakes are just too high to nominate someone who can't stand up to tough questions, who never had their authenticity put to the test, or who doesn't have experience winning independent voters. This isn't about tradition or history, as proud of that as I am. New Hampshire should go first, not because we created and hosted the first direct primary 100 years ago. We should go first because we're the best state to help our party win 2 years from now. That's why I urge the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee to allow New Hampshire to conduct the first presidential primary sanctioned by the DNC. Thank you so much for your consideration, and we're now open for questions.
Thank you, Senator. As you've said, the floor is open for discussion. I'm going to ask members who have questions to turn their name tents up so that we can call on them. I'm going to begin with a question myself, and it could be to any of your members. Would you talk a little bit about the media market or markets in New Hampshire?
Sure. Why don't I start, and then if any of my colleagues want to answer. As you know, we have one major media market that most New Hampshire's voters watch to get their news. That's WMUR. When we talk about highly competitive, close statewide races, like my Senate race, especially in 2016, we also have to consider the Boston media market, and there's a little bit of Vermont and Maine media markets that cross over on our borders as well. But most New Hampshire voters get their news from WMUR, and people can be successful in New Hampshire through earned media because they're having those conversations and they're getting covered by local press, and that they can get lifted up. They also do not have to afford the most expensive media markets, which are Boston, to be successful in the primary. MUR really does dominate there.
Can any of you, and perhaps Chair Buckley, you would be the person to give us an idea of what the cost of the major media market is, or what the cost of Channel 9 is?
Well, each candidate makes their own decision. One thing that I think is most exciting is New Hampshire has one of the top couple states for people who are online. And so the sort of digital advertising that happens and really provides an opportunity for a significantly cheaper way of communicating to the voters, since we're all online anyways, and that's from the top of the state all the way down. And we really encourage folks to do that. You can win New Hampshire without utilizing Boston, no offense, but certainly people can utilize that. But I think I can't stress enough what Senator Hassan said. The political graveyard is filled with candidates who thought they could come in and buy New Hampshire by spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions, on Boston TV or doing all that sort of stuff. That just doesn't fly. It's really about authenticity.
I'll just add, the reason in close statewide elections like mine in 16, the Boston market becomes something that you have to invest in is because Boston covers a southern part of the state that is highly populated by people who actually moved to New Hampshire from Massachusetts, who get their news still from Boston TV, and they tend to lean conservative independent. And so in very close races where you're trying to sway Republican and independent voters who are conservative, you're going to invest in that Boston market. In a New Hampshire primary, among Democrats and like-minded independents and independents generally, MUR and digital really does do the trick.
Thank you.
Just add one point to that. The price point is actually $140 per point for WMUR, which is one of the most cost-effective buys in the country. The other thing about New Hampshire is that we are scheduled to be completely broadband covered within the next few years, which few other states can say.
Thank you. I'm looking for other questions. Barry?
Can you give us an idea? I mean, you've been first for quite some time. The percentage of maybe the non-incumbent Democratic candidates that won first and then ended up being the presidential candidate?
I don't have a perfect Rolodex of all of the history in my head, but what I can tell you is this. Jimmy Carter won in '76, being an unknown governor, and Bill Clinton obviously was an underdog when he won. I have watched in primary event after primary event candidates being tested regardless of whether they are Hillary Clinton, obviously well known, with plenty of resources behind her, or somebody less well known. But what has really struck me is how much better these candidates get in the New Hampshire primary process. I will give you one example, which is John Kerry in 2004. John decided to put together a series of grassroots events that were at firehouses all across New Hampshire, chili bakes. And we watched him get more and more comfortable talking directly to voters because of that exposure and because he began to learn, and I say this as a senator, that senatorial speak does not always charm and delight voters. And there came a moment a couple of days before the primary at the Elks Club in Dover where lots of press, remember we had captured Saddam Hussein, we were at war in Iraq, and a 6-year-old asked the president, asked John Kerry, he said, "So I'm really worried that Saddam Hussein is going to escape." And in my head is, please, John, don't give a long Senate answer explaining all kinds of things about our military capacity and everything. And he just looked at this little boy and said, "Honey, Saddam Hussein is not going to escape. You're going to be okay." That's the kind of development that candidates go through. And the last thing I will say is I am quite convinced that if it had not been for New Hampshire voters in the 2016 primary on both sides of the aisle, we would not have marshaled the resources to fight the opioid and fentanyl epidemic the way we now are, and we're beginning to see decreases in overdose deaths and beginning to see a light at the end of that tunnel. And that is because fentanyl ravaged New Hampshire in all corners of the state, and voters began to talk to candidates about it, and I literally had candidate after candidate saying to me, "I didn't know about the fentanyl thing. I didn't know about the opioid thing. What should we do about it?" These conversations make a real difference, and we have been a home of underdogs, obviously John McCain as well, throughout our history.
I just want to underscore that New Hampshire's never wanted to be the decider. What we consider ourselves is a vetting operation, and that we allow the states that come subsequently to make that sort of a decision. What we do is try to separate, like, here are the top 3, 4, 5 that really are your best choices, and then the states following us then get to make that decision.
Thank you, Chair Buckley. Stephanie?
Thank you, New Hampshire, for your presentation. Stephanie Campagna-Wheaton from New Jersey. I fear I will be asking every state the same question. What is the average cost of rent for a one-bedroom in Manchester, largest city?
$1,800, about $1,800.
Thank you, Donna.
And to say that the housing crisis is a challenge for us is an understatement as well. I think that is a national challenge that is exhibited well in New Hampshire, not well, but starkly in New Hampshire.
But the good news for young people is that in New Hampshire, we have a long tradition of families allowing campaign workers to stay with them and live with them, therefore cutting the costs and giving them a safe place to do their work while they campaign for the various presidential candidates.
Andre?
Hi, good morning. Andre Washington from Ohio. You mentioned earlier that your numbers have increased. Do you have a breakdown? Is that African American, Hispanic, immigrants? Do you have a breakdown of how they increased in the...
Joanne's presentation had some of that specific data. I don't have it specific other than I know that our communities of color have doubled over the last 15 years. And as I said, half of our school children in Manchester and Nashua are children of color. But Joanne, do you want to look at your...
I guess what I'd like to say about our minority population and diversity in New Hampshire, it's one of the things that comes up often, that we are a predominantly white state. But as it relates to voices being heard, we do open our doors to every community in the state, and candidates have an opportunity and seek out those diverse communities to speak with. Sometimes being a minority in a majority state, your voice is muffled. And what we try to do is to lift all voices in the state through our caucus, state party run caucuses, and also through our candidate recruitment efforts that we make. We do an excellent job of really broadening the door, making it as wide open as possible for all people to come into the Democratic fold. Specific numbers, I'd be happy to get back to you about what that looks like.
And I guess I would add two things. One is, no state is going to check every box. We are not saying that you should choose us for our racial or ethnic diversity, although we do our best, as Joanne said, to be as open as we can be to participation. And I think one of the things I would point out is that our 424-person volunteer legislature means that there are real opportunities for participation from people from all walks of life. And I often think that women have led in New Hampshire more than in other places, partly because the barrier of entry to political activity is that much lower.
Thank you. For the next question, we have another Andre.
Thank you, Chairman. This question is going to continue on the demographic question, but this one's going to be a little more specific, and it's going to come off as a little pointed, but I just think it matters when we are talking about the state going first, which has extra emphasis. I'm from Texas, a majority-minority state and a plurality Latino state. A major discussion following the 2024 election was the Democratic Party's backslide among Latino populations and what we need to do as a party to win back these voters. And New Hampshire's demographics, which we were just talking about, I see on the census are 5% Latino. So for the state to go first, I feel that we need to be able to make sure that this is one of the populations that we're really hearing from. So I would like to hear some more specifics about what New Hampshire could do if it was going first to make sure that we are learning from and speaking with Latino populations specifically.
Thank you for the question. We actually have among, I think, the state party's strongest caucuses. Our Black African American caucus, our Latino caucus. The number of elected officials that are Latino in New Hampshire are significant, and you can see them not just in Manchester or in Nashua, though there are significant numbers on our school boards and on the Board of Aldermen in both cities. But you will find that the voters will respond to them no matter what community they happen to live in. So it's very strong, and I think what Joanne touched on, which I think is critically important, while it might not be the size of the population, it's the access of that population. Is that when you come to New Hampshire, you're going to be able to ask that community is going to have the front row seat to be able to ask a question and be involved. And where you see in some of the larger states, or if people fly in, fly out, and there's no real interaction. But if you have met with any of our Latinos or Latinas in New Hampshire, you know that their voices will definitely be heard.
Thank you. Keith?
Yes, Keith Yamamoto from California, and in parallel with what Andres was saying, in reflection of the 2024 election, there was precipitous drop-off on the Democratic share of votes for people of color except African-American women. Right. Which suggests that we need to do something differently. And in light of that, you're saying in New Hampshire you're going to be addressing some of the issues relating to people of color. One of them, obviously, is what kind of media you actually use. And also other avenues in grassroots organizing, media, et cetera. What kind of plans would you have as an early primary state to enable us to elect a Democratic president in 2024, and testing out avenues and strategies specifically to those demographic groups? And inclusive of that is the youth vote that didn't turn out anything close to 2020 as opposed to 2024, but not to discount, in addition to the Latino population, the African-American population, the Asian population, because in reality, if we had, 270,000 more votes, we would not be in the situation in several states, battleground states, that we would not be having the same kind of discussion today about who's in the White House.
Why don't I start and then see if any of my colleagues want to add? Again, as we said in our presentations, we appreciate and value the criteria that the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee has set out: fairness, efficiency, and rigor here, to be the first state in a group of early nominating states. And that early nominating process should ensure that there are states whose demographics look different than New Hampshire's and who might have larger or do have larger percentages of different minority groups. But at the end of the day, for fairness, rigor, and efficiency, we believe New Hampshire is the right state to vet those early candidates. We are still, and I'm happy to talk about the things we do in New Hampshire, the fact that if you are having a house party and somebody calls from a different community and perhaps a different demographic than you and says, I want to come to the house party, or I'm going to be at that town hall, we're going to say yes, and they're going to participate. And the candidate's going to hear directly about that person's concerns. But what we are talking about is making sure that the kind of vetting for authenticity and the ability to attract independent voters, which will include, for instance, a fair number of Hispanic voters and Latino voters, as I have been looking at the data recently, is going to be really important too. So we've asked for your consideration as first in the state, understanding that there will be a whole group of early states, none of which will check every box, but together will make a real difference.
And I'd like to add to that is that the New Hampshire Democratic Party is well suited, and of course Raymond could speak to this better than I, but I have observed it, I've participated in it, where the campaigns come in and utilize the party as advisors on where they should go, who they should speak to. Candidates have an opportunity to hone their messaging on the fly from one event to another. If something doesn't resonate in the North Country, they can work on that. We see ourselves really as a springboard to the other states and really help, again, vet the candidates. Not necessarily pick the winner, but vet the candidates. And our entire Democratic community, as well as independents, because they're invited to the parties as well, have an opportunity to ask their specific questions face-to-face of the candidates. That's where the retail politics really is a benefit. We've also seen, one area that I'm particularly interested in is our youth vote, and we have seen our young Democrats grow exponentially. When I first became involved in the New Hampshire Democratic Party, this is back in 2002-ish, there were maybe 40 members of the Young Democrats, maybe, and now there are over like almost 1,000 members of the Young Democrats in New Hampshire. They raise real money. They get the speakers. The candidates want to come to their events. So we have invested early and often in trying to expand that, being on college campuses and actually in high schools, starting that early.
Thank you. Alicia?
Alicia Andrews from Oklahoma. My question, thank you, Joanne, my question is about the youth and about diversity and where they intersect. We just heard that the diversity in your state has doubled and it's still only at about 11%. So my question is about college. How many of your college students actually stay? And what is the diversity of the college students who stay? Do we have an idea?
Why don't we get you that data, because I don't have a specific idea, specific details. I will say that we have a concerted effort and have been more successful in retaining our college students in New Hampshire. But again, our case for the first in the nation is based on the criteria that have been set about fairness, efficiency, and rigor. And again, I would never say we should be the only state or that other states shouldn't continue to winnow the field, which I think is ultimately what will end up having the strongest, best candidate.
Thank you.
I know it doesn't have a direct correlation, but I think one only has to look at what our delegation to the 2020 National Convention looked like. We're nearly 50% of our elected delegates were under the age of 40. That we nearly doubled all of our goals, whether it's AAPI or Black African American, Latino. We made a very large effort of making sure. I think we're the only state that actually told a presidential candidate that no, you didn't actually do a good job in outreach, and we're not accepting your delegate slate. So we are very, we understand the importance of that, and we want to make sure that that we include. But we have a very vibrant high school Democrats organization, along with the college and our Young Democrats.
Thank you. David?
I have David McDonald, Washington. I have two questions, both of which I think are narrow enough that you can get them in the same time slot. In your presentation 4 years ago, Ray, I think, mentioned the export value of campaign training that had an impact on other states throughout the rest of the calendar. And I didn't hear anything about that this time, and I wondered if you would maybe comment on that or elaborate on it. And then the second question is the same question I ask Delaware and I'll ask other states, which is, assuming you are granted a waiver for being in the early window, but not necessarily first, what's your flexibility to comply with the calendar?
So let me start with the campaign training ground. It is a really important campaign training ground. Recognize that every candidate in New Hampshire except the United States Senate and incumbents run every 2 years for everything. And on the off years, we have local and city elections, right? So people are campaigning all the time. I always say when you're in the governor's office or even as a U.S. Senator from New Hampshire, you don't have a set of things that you say on the campaign and then move into governing and then come back to campaigning. Campaigning and governing is one big conversation with voters. And I think that's inherently critical kind of campaign training for people to have because we have so many races, because we are so active politically. Lots of people do come and learn the ropes of retail and grassroots training. Many of people who've been on my campaigns or other presidential campaigns are deployed across the country right now at more and more senior levels with campaigns from a whole different and variety slew of states and candidates. Raymond, I don't know if you want to answer the second piece.
I think about 20 years ago, there was a conference that the DNC held, and it was talking about the training of the staff. And while I was sitting there, it really struck me that we need to do a better job of making sure that young people of color are employed. And so we made that sort of commitment with our coordinated campaigns and also with the presidentials. And you will see that while we may only have a population of 5 to 6 to 7, when you look at our staffs that we hire and really engage to send out, they're significantly higher. I believe that 20% of our coordinated campaign staff last cycle was of color. So it's really, we take that role seriously about training and deploying them around the country. We want to make sure that everybody has that equal opportunity.
And your second question, which took me a minute to remember again, sorry. Look, New Hampshire will make every effort it can to comply with the Rules and Bylaws Committee, but there are some factors outside of our control. Our Secretary of State is required by law to schedule the New Hampshire primary before other states. And so we will do everything we can to comply with the law, and that's why I think it's important that we look at the entire nominating window and the standards that you all have all set. We think we meet the standard to be best suited to be first. But again, we will do everything we can to comply, but there are certainly things outside of our control here.
Okay. All right. We have 6 minutes left in the period here, and we have 6 people with questions lined up. So I'm going to ask people to be direct and to the point. That will be David, Jamie, Roxanne, April, Jane, and Frank. David, we've done already. Jamie?
Thank you, Jamie Selzer, North Dakota. Our primary benchmark here is winning. That's what we want to do. As Barry pointed out, since 1976 was the last year that a Democrat won New Hampshire primary and then went on to become president in the first term. And looking back to 1980, you've held the House or the Senate in the state just a relatively small handful of times, more success with governor. Is being first in the nation serving the best interests of New Hampshire Democrats if we're not producing winners consistently?
I don't think anyone brought up, the demographics of the state are 40% are independents, with 29% Democratic and 31% Republican. That 40% can walk in and choose a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot, whether it's in the presidential primary or in our state primary. We also have same-day voter registration as well, which explodes our voting rolls, especially in the really tightly contested. The fact that the New Hampshire primary is so polling that the independent voters, by over 75%, I believe, said that it's one of their top priorities of retaining the New Hampshire primary. So does it have an impact? I believe so, but I sure as heck don't want to take that chance.
I'd add again that our argument is not that we should pick the nominee. Our argument is that we should be vetting the nominees so that they are better prepared for the states that follow, which will, by definition, be larger, more diverse, and that's really important too. The one other thing I will add is that the Republicans are going to have the first in the nation primary be New Hampshire. And there is a big vacuum when a whole bunch of Republican presidential candidates are coming into our state, highlighting local candidates who are Republicans, and there isn't the same fulsome, evenly balanced Democratic response. And I think that can put us at a disadvantage at the local level and occasionally at the federal level as well.
Thank you. Roxanne?
Thank you. Roxanne Brown, Pennsylvania, over here. No problem. First, I just want to say from a state level, the labor movement just really appreciates the efforts in New Hampshire to beat back right-to-work efforts. Every effort has been beaten back at the state level, and we just really appreciate that. Joanne, you lifted up the union density in the state. This is a question that I'll ask states that have a higher union density. You guys have about 9.2% in the state. Just curious about what that engagement with labor would look like and will look like.
Sure. New Hampshire is a non-right-to-work state. As you said, not only have we defeated it multiple times, but most of the other states under consideration are right-to-work states. So it's something that we take great pride in. Labor has always had a seat at the table, and the door is always open. As a former caucus chair, because I was in the state Senate, we worked hand in hand with labor. Labor are our partners and will always continue to be. Our campaign staff is unionized. I'm actually a lawyer as well and have worked on those issues with the party. We ensure that we have a fair and robust presentation of labor and engagement, and we continue to foster within our own organization a labor-oriented community for our organizers, for all of the folks that work on the various campaigns.
April?
Thanks. Thank you all so much for the presentation. I don't want to take us backwards, but I do think that this is a really important and key point. You said you don't have specific data on demographics, but I did a quick Google search. And according to the census, the demographics of New Hampshire is 88% white, 4% Latino, 1.5% Black, and 2% AAPI. Does that sound right to you? I got the question mark in.
Yeah, actually, we said we didn't have the data about the college demographics. Joanne did present the data in her presentation, but that sounds about right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jane?
Thank you, and thank you, President Buckley, for everything you do for the ASDC. I'm curious how you see being first in the nation creates better permanent year-round infrastructure for the party. So what does it mean for you all, either with increased voter registration, increased county parties, that type of thing?
We are very fortunate that well, every state party needs influx of new blood, new energy, new people, and every 4 years we see that occur. And we make a huge effort to make sure that we reach out to them. And I don't want to get into the weeds. I can talk to you a little bit about what we do to make sure that every volunteer, every activist that gets involved in any of the presidential candidates then immediately gets enveloped into our party. So when you go to our delegate selection caucuses, it's, do you want to join this caucus? Would you think about running for the legislature? I mean, we aggressively bring the energy in, the organization in. As Senator Hassan said, we have 2-year terms for our entire state government. We have over 4,000 municipal elected offices. Many of them are only 1-year terms. So we have elections going nonstop. So it is really, if there's a place that democracy exists, it's really New Hampshire with the 400-member legislature and the 2-year terms. The fact that you only have to be age 18 to run for most offices in the state of New Hampshire. You can be mayor of Manchester at age 18 if you wish. Wouldn't recommend it, but it's a tough job. But I think by building the sort of strength, it's one thing to bring people in, but it's another to empower them. And we make a huge effort to make sure that they are empowered.
And final question, Frank?
Yes, I'd just like to, frankly, on DC, like to follow up on David's question. First, thank you very much for a very excellent presentation. You really covered a lot of ground very well this time around. But if the committee decides, as it did 4 years ago, that New Hampshire should be an early state but not the first state, what specific actions would you take in response to that?
I'll start and then turn it over to Raymond. As I said, first of all, I was glad we were able to get to a resolution in 2024. It was hard for all of us. I don't mean just in New Hampshire. I think it was hard for the party. As I said, we will do everything we can to comply with the decision, but the Secretary of State is required by New Hampshire state law. And that state law is going to stay on the books. And so it is a very difficult thing to contemplate being able to resolve without trying to continue talks with this committee. But I think it would just be hard for, I don't know what the Secretary of State does. I mean, I know the Secretary will schedule the New Hampshire primary for ahead of time. And there will be candidates who come in, and I expect there will be Democratic candidates who come in if that is scheduled. And I think that it presents a lot of unknowns and challenges.
I'll let it stand.
And again, maybe this is a good way to wrap up. We are not arguing that because of history and tradition, we should continue to be first. We are pointing out that it is our political engagement and our culture that created the 400-person legislature that has constant and interesting and challenging and highly competitive campaigns all across the state that makes us best suited to do it. It is that culture and that commitment to grassroots politics that meant that New Hampshire had the idea to create the first direct primary and hosted it. That isn't the reason we should continue, but it does reflect our commitment to it and our capacity for it. And again, with the excellent criteria that this Rules and Bylaws Committee established, fairness, efficiency, rigor, we think we have made the case that we are the best state to go first, and we obviously hope you all agree. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thanks to all of you for an excellent presentation.
Thanks.
The time for that presentation has expired, and that concludes our presentations from the Eastern region. We will now recess for approximately 1 hour before we resume with the Midwestern states and Illinois.
Well, we need to entertain a motion to. So we're going to entertain a motion to recess. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Yeah, ayes have it. Lunch for an hour.